My brain's first thought was, we're dead. Oh, no. That's a truck on a road above us. And we were doing, I'm sure, better part of 600. And 111 going that fast, you can't hear it coming at you. So this guy's minding his own business, and suddenly he's as close as you get to a jet without actually getting hit by it. He's probably still cleaning his trousers out.
All right, guys. Well, I don't even remember how we got started on this idea. I mean, was one of you that reached out, or who reached out to connect all of us?
One of the guys in our squadron, Digger Wells, knows you, I guess.
Okay.
He and I worked together at American Airlines, so.
All right.
So he kind of hooked us all up.
And he said, even though you've had an episode on the F-111, you need to get Gwin Bob and Rim in here and talk some Desert Storm stories. Is that it?
Well, it hit the wide band squadron email list, and hey, anybody want to do this?
Uh-huh.
I have reason to be down here anyway. My dad lives up near Disneyland, so well, geez, let's just do this as a twofer.
All right.
So I'll do that. Give me an excuse to come on down.
Well, in that case, let me look over at the camera and say hello and welcome to the Fighter Pilot Podcast. Today we're talking again about the F-111. We've got Gwin Bob and Rim here, who have some experiences flying together too, as I understand, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And we still talk to each other.
Well, I guess that's like a marriage or something, maybe?
Yeah, every couple of years we have a reunion, right?
Yeah. Well, we had an episode 111 on the F-111, and I thought about trying to hurry up and listen to that before you guys came in so I could remember what I said or didn't say. But in the end, we'll just talk sea stories and Desert Storm and just kind of see where we go. We'll got some listener questions. Hopefully I'll remember to ask you, and we'll go from there. Let's start with you guys, though. Kevin, we'll start with you. Where are you from, and what got you interested in the Air Force, and what did you do?
Well, I loved aviation from when I was 8 years old. Got to see a cockpit for the first time, just like most aviators, and I fell in love with all the buttons and switches. Graduated from Embry-Riddle in '83 with an ROTC. Had a nav slot, went to Mather, got my wings, and then got an F4 out of there, and went down to lead and fighter training. Fighter and leader training, whatever. They switched the names a couple times. Down at Holloman for T-38s, found my way to RTU, and did RTU at Homestead. And then my first assignment as operational was in the F4 at Seymour Johnson, North Carolina. Flew there for 3 years and got tired of the air-to-air thing. Sorry. But I love the air to ground, and I wanted to go low and fast. And so F-111 slot came available, and I grabbed it and went to Mountain Home in '88. And on to Upper Hayford. And did Upper Hayford for 3 years, and including Desert Storm. Had a lot of good flying in England. The tour itself, or the personal life, wasn't great, but the flying was amazing. The squadron was amazing, and still have lifelong relationships there with those guys. After Desert Storm, I went back to Mather as an instructor, and did that for about a year, and not even a year, only about 6 to 8 months. And then they had the RIF come up in 1990. Reduction in Force. Yeah. And I knew they were targeting the 83 year group, so I knew my number was coming up. My wife and I said, where do you want to go and get a free pass? So it's like, let's go back to Turkey where we met. So we met in Turkey. I'll go with that story later, but we went back to Turkey. I was chief of plans until I got my notification. And then after the Air Force, basically got in the airlines and doing nav data, and that's what I'm doing today with American Airlines.
All right, still doing it?
Yep.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love it.
Sounds good. Gwin Bob, how about you? Where'd you get your start?
Well, I guess I got my start when I was about 4 years old, walking through living room. My parents were watching TV, and there was a John Wayne movie called Flying Leathernecks that was on, and you could hear my head ring. It's like it just got struck like a bell, and I go, that's for me. Wow. And so I graduated high school and joined the ROTC unit at University of Southern California, ultimately just a walk-on, and ultimately got a 3-year scholarship out of that. I went to pilot training at Vance Air Force Base in Oklahoma. I did pretty well, pilot training. The guys who got fighters out of nav school, they were like absolute top of the class. Our number one guy got F-15s, and I was okay, but I wasn't number one, but I still was going to get a fighter. And I'm thinking F-4 probably. And out of the blue comes an F-111. F-111s never, ever went to pilot training graduates because you needed 1,000 hours of time, fighter time, to be in the left seat of the airplane. And the Air Force ultimately decided they couldn't man the system that way and decided they were going to give a go at throwing nuggets in there. And there were 7 of us that got tossed in. So it was kind of an interesting experience, a lot of high-level monitoring going on that we didn't know about at the time. Anyway, so I was a cannon for about a year and a half. They needed somebody upper Hayford. I was up at Stanival taking my test, get a phone call. Hey, you want to go to Hayford? Why are the military personnel people calling me at Stanival? I'm a lieutenant. Yeah. Nobody cares about lieutenant. And I thought
where's Hayford, sorry?
That's near Oxford, England.
Right.
It's one of the 2 F-111 bases there. And I wasn't married at the time, so I gave that about a quarter second of thought. Because I was in Clovis, New Mexico, the other name for which is so far from heaven, so close to Texas. And so went to Hayford. I had a tour over there, 3-year tour, and then got out of the Air Force. Went to work with a buddy of mine. He's starting up an electrical engineering company, and I did that for a couple of years, and then I just decided I missed the Air Force. I missed the people. There's a whole bunch of stuff I just missed. I did a good job. I liked what I was doing, living on the beach up Manhattan Beach there. That was all okay. Anyway, all the other pilots are getting out, thundering herd to join the airlines. I'm this one guy swimming in the opposite direction. So I went to Mountain Home, requalified in the airplane. I was RTU instructor, went to fighter weapons school while I was there. And after 2 years at Mountain Home, went back to Upper Hayford, back to the 79th Squadron. 4 years there. After that, Air Command and Gulf College, 3 years at the Pentagon. And then I went to Del Rio, Texas to be the XO in Navy speak of a T-37 squadron there. And then I'd been doing that for about a year and a half, that wing chief of safety. And then I got a call from the wing commander asking me, in a way that means you're going to do it, to go to NAS Whiting Field to be the skipper of VT-3. And that was the same reaction I had, was like, what? I had no idea that there were joint training squadrons, that Vance Air Force Base had one and a counterpart at Whiting Field, where half the students and half the officers were from the other service, instructors, and every other commander was from the other service. So I ended my Air Force career with 2 years of VT-3 at Whiting Field. Then after that, went to, immediately after retiring, flew with Northwest Airlines. Well, flew furloughed. I was furloughed for about 3 years. You're on the seniority list. Yeah. I was with Northwest for about 5 years, got furloughed the second time, and decided that really wasn't something I wanted to do any more of. Got lucky, got an interview with FedEx. Went to work with FedEx June of 2006 and flew the MD-11 out of Anchorage in 727, 757, 767, nice. And then retired, forcibly ejected from the cockpit about going on 4 years ago now.
Based on an unavoidable birthday? Or
Yeah, one of those things. Yeah. They kept counting.
Yeah, well, taking up the proposal to make it 67 won't do you any good.
No.
But for those who are trying to stay a little longer, you might see my VT2 doer bird patches on the wall behind me. So that was me in 1993 and 4.
Guy, we just barely missed.
Yeah. So when you got out, were you like only kind of sort of out, like you were still on maybe a terminal leave, or you were
completely out.
Okay.
Completely separated.
So how does that, just real quick, and it's not necessarily germane to our discussion today, but what do? Do you go to a recruiter? You call?
That's exactly what I did.
Did you?
I just walked into a recruiter's office.
He thinks you're someone looking for directions because you're older.
Yeah, that's right. I said, hey, I was a pilot. Wonder if it's possible to get back in. And he said, sure, but we need a letter of recommendation from an 06 or higher. And I managed to find one that I hadn't, like, terminally pissed off.
All right.
And so a letter of recommendation, and I think it was about 2 months. I had to get a flight physical.
Sure.
All that stuff. But it was a matter of 2 or 3 months from the time I said I'd like to get back in to when I was in. And I think the big thing that helped was the exit, because the airlines were hiring at the time.
You know, if you get out at, let's just arbitrarily say March 31st, 1995, and let's say you come back April 1st, 1997, do they just pretend it's...
They gave me the option. I could I could have my date of rank suspended for 2 years, or I could have come back in as if I'd never left.
Okay.
And I opted to suspend. It would just be a huge gap. You're trying to get promoted. And
it affects your pay scales. And everything.
Yeah, a lot of other stuff. The big thing is if I chose the other option, I would have never been in Desert Storm.
Oh, wow.
Because the rank and everything would have been, I wouldn't have been still in a squadron at that point, things like that. So turned out to be a good choice.
Well, just to demonstrate how little research I did, like I said, for today, and also not being a good listener. So were you both pilots?
He's the pilot, AC. I'm the Weapons Systems Officer.
Okay. So when you went to the F4, you meant
in the back seat.
In the back, and then the right seat of the F-111.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
But then you said you went to American, but not in a pilot capacity?
Correct.
Okay.
When I got out of the Air Force, looking for work, I spent about 300 resumes out, and I couldn't find anything.
Really?
So finally found a job at America West as a ticket agent. I had a ticket counter, doing $6 an hour job, getting screamed at by little old ladies who lost their luggage after flying 19 combat missions. And it's like, this sucks. Yeah. So I ended up doing that for, 3 to 6 months. Finally found a job in engineering. And the manager of engineering says, you're perfect for a nav database job. Why don't you come work for me? So that's how I got in the nav database world.
All right. Yeah. I sometimes tell both the flight attendants and the gate agents, say, I think you have a harder job than me. I only have to deal with one guy or gal, but you got to deal with all the unhappy people. So,
yeah, it was a very tough time in my life, but it was rewarding.
Sounds like it. Good. All right. So imagine, before we get into good, hopefully, war stories, imagine a person either didn't listen to episode 111, which I don't know if you had a chance to check that out, but it was with two gentlemen from Australia.
Yeah, I listened to that.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Or imagine you're a person who's in his early 50s and is busy day to day and can't remember what he recorded 2 years ago or however long it's been, and give us a high-level overview of the F-111. I mean, we don't need to go into every detail on this, but I mean, maybe a little bit about why it came around and what it did and what it was good at, and maybe even if you want to bash on the Navy a little bit, we can talk about it. Tried to land on carriers, but...
The 111 came about because McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense at the time, decided he knew better than everyone else, and that the Air Force and the Navy were spending too much money on what were essentially duplicative weapon systems. You don't need this many different airplanes. We can make one airplane that will do everything for everybody. And this guy was like a super genius person too, like stratospheric IQ, and I don't know how that slid. But the idea was we want an airplane that doesn't use a lot of runway, because at the time, the F-105 Thunder Chief was the kind of the long-range air-to-ground interdiction kind of airplane. It was built by North American. I think the joke at the time was if you built a runway that would go all the way around the world, North American would build an airplane that needed every inch of it. So the idea was we want an airplane that goes fast, we want a fighter, we want long range, and we also want to be able to land on unimproved fields. We don't want to have, this makes sense. You want to bottle up your whole Air Force at a couple of big concrete runways. And so it'd be nice if you can get something to do all of those things. And that's where the sweep wing came from, and the variable geometry wing, because you could get both the high-speed capability and a pretty decent low landing performance. We could easily land the airplane in 4,000, take off in about 4,500 feet, land a little bit less than that. It would, in that regard, it was pretty good. The terrain following radar gave us the all-weather, which is really kind of that was stealth at the time, night all-weather. So the terrain following radar, that was good for that. Afterburning fan jet engines, first time that's ever been done, that gave us a lot better fuel economy. But some other things crept up, like if you want to go long range, you got to put gas in the airplane. We took off with 30,000 pounds internal.
Wow.
Well, if you're going to put gas in it, then you got to have room for the gas. And then the airplane gets bigger. Our empty weight was like 50,000 pounds. You just can't do an air-to-air fighter that weighs 50,000 pounds. Problem one. Problem two, if you have variable geometry wings, by definition, they're going to be small. They're going to be skinny because as they sweep back, they have to have some place to go. They actually don't have any place to go because the fuselage is there. Because they don't have a place to go, you got to have really thin wings. Really thin wings, really heavy airplane, and you got a really heavy wing loading. I think we had 155 pounds per square foot of airplane. It's just nuts. I mean, for air-to-air. It's just never going to work for air-to-air. Now, it turned out that those characteristics were very good if you wanted a long-range, high-speed, low-altitude, good payload. We had a really nice attack radar on there. Kind of made the airplane wide. That's why we had to sit side by side, because the radar dish was, like this. And so that's kind of how it came about. It had a lot of development problems. The thing had a bad habit of shedding wings on brand new airplanes.
Yikes.
I had an airplane with 100 hours on it. Wing came off, coming off the range at Nellis. There were some problems with horizontal slab actuators that they're little valves that control, in the tail of the airplane, that control hydraulic flow to move the stabilizers. And they get galled, and then your stabilizer just drives to one position. You lose the airplane.
Jeez.
And the reliability issues. And the airplane had a pretty bad reputation for a while. I think it was called the Switchblade Edsel at one point. The Air Force was sufficiently unproud of the airplane. It never got a name.
That's right.
Never had an official name until the day it retired. That's when the Air Force finally called it the Aardvark. So, which is what everybody called it.
Right. Or the pig.
Or,
I guess.
Pig, yeah.
Because it roots around.
Yeah, it roots around.
Yeah.
The airplane kind of was not exactly a redheaded stepchild, but definitely it was not an F-15 or anything like that.
Right.
And then Desert Storm came along. Well, Libya, first of all,
Right.
Libya really vindicated a lot of the things that the F-111 was built for, because it just, nobody else could do stuff like that. And then Desert Storm came along, and particularly F-111F with its Pave Tack was just awesome. Everybody knows about the F-111F. It did Libya. It did tank plinking. You saw the videos of it blowing up hardened aircraft shelters. That was an entirely different employment than the F-111E. We used ancient, well-worn, hand-tooled manual bombing techniques.
Big targets.
Essentially, actually, we got kind of lucky with some stuff there.
Okay.
We used basically the same bombing techniques as a B-17. Get an altitude over the target. The weapon's going to fall a certain amount, when you release it, and you got to have your release point where the trajectory of the weapon is going to intercept the ground at the target.
Yeah.
Well, back then, they weren't exactly hitting pickled barrels like they claimed to be doing. And we were essentially doing that same thing, except a lot closer to the ground, a lot faster, and with radar that can aim pretty accurately.
And computers.
Well,
maybe? No?
No, we didn't have, the F-111E didn't have a weapons delivery computer that was programmed for any of our ordnance that we had. And the issue here is, in order to have your weapon hit the target, you have to have it from a predetermined release point and vector. So if you're coming along on TFR and the world's not completely flat, the thing could be nibbling, or it could see terrain beyond you and start a climb, or can decide it wants to go down, and you add that pitch vector onto a dump bomb, and now you're starting to introduce some pretty serious errors. And then on top of that, I don't know if you did any air-to-ground range work in the F-18, but you call the range controller, hey, what's the altimeter? So you get a good altimeter, and that tells you what your height above the target's going to be, which is also pretty important.
Yeah.
Because you get about 9 feet of altitude error, which each hundredth in the altimeter setting. If you've gone 300 miles, you could be a whole tenth off. And so now you're 100 feet high or low, and with the impact angle, because the impact angle would be kind of shallow, now you're introducing pretty significant range error. And we made up for that initially by just carrying a lot of bombs.
Drop some early, drop some late.
Well, if you have, just round numbers, we would have, let's say, 12 to
14 Mark 82s.
Yeah, so 12 Mark 82s in our low altitude load. And that would be, you're laying down a bomb about every 60 feet for about 1,000 feet, some number like that. So if your target is in that range somewhere, if you're within 1,000 feet, you're probably going to have it be within that length. But where we got lucky, and I promise I'm not going to drag this out too far, is about a month before Desert Storm started, the Air Force delivered to us a mini computer. Now, that a mini computer maybe your audience doesn't even know what a telephone booth is.
About the size of this table.
It was about the size of a telephone booth. It was about 3 or 4 feet on a side and about 6 feet high.
Oh, jeez.
And what it had in it was the WGS database for the entire world overlaid on TPC charting. So you have an image layer of the charts, then overlaid on top of that was a layer with elevation data. And then we could, and this is where things get a little exciting in Desert Storm, TPC chart, you don't get any real good, your elevations aren't that close. It's very core 1 to 500,000 chart. It's all we had in Iraq. Found you could take the cursor and just start pinging along the route. And what we decided we'd do is we'd pick a corridor that was like a mile either side of the target, do a lot of pinging, find out the highest elevation of that in that corridor, at plus like 2 miles beyond the target, beyond the release point, 4 miles, something like that, so you could let the TFR back on. And we'd add 400 feet to that. Then we'd pick a point prior, depending on how far you were climbing, to get to that, where you come off the TFR, hand fly it. And then we'd be hand flying the airplane at 400 feet above the highest point at about 600 knots, centering up the steering and nailing the airspeed. And then we'd solved the altitude problem by some point prior, close as we could get prior to the IP, find a flat stretch of terrain, find out what that altitude was.
I got a story there.
Okay, I'll stop talking. So, and then you'd spin the Colesman window to get your radar altimeter, add your radar altimeter altitude to that elevation point, and then make your baro read that. And now you have your altimeter setting. So
and this was all for accuracy.
It was all for accuracy, and it would
on the E-model.
On the E-model. Right. And now we were not going to hit targets like the F model was just going to, one bomb, boom, done, game over.
Right. But to Rim's point, if you had a POL facility, let's say, or an area target of some sort.
A building. We got some really good. We had a EWGC eyesight that was on the top of a 3,000-foot ridge.
That was our first mission, yeah.
That was really, because these guys were coming in, they paddled off, 10 degrees nose high. They held it until lead off altitude and then 0G push over to capture the baro altitude, and then went across the target, this ridge line, directly sideways across the ridge line, 400 feet above the ridge line, all at night.
I hope they paid you well. All right, well, so you got something to add here?
Well, about the altitude cal, that is so important. We had one mission, probably skipping ahead a little bit here, but in Desert Storm. By the way, we never flew together in Desert Storm together. We flew a lot together in peacetime prior to, and the Squadron. As a matter of fact, we might have even had a check ride together.
Yep.
But in any case, one mission, we had a target. It was actually 4 Mark 84s, a transformer. That's where we usually hit our transformers with the Mark 84 2,000-pounders. And doing an altitude cal prior, usually we have like several aircraft on one target in the package. But in this particular package, Doug and I, my pilot, we had this target, and we were going westbound at Erbil. It was north of Erbil, up in northern Iraq, and did my altitude cal, and bombs came off normally, and then on my way home, I'm thinking, did I do the math right? Because if I subtracted instead of added, because prior to the target, there was a town. The transformers were like maybe 2,500 yards past, about 2,500 yards past the town. I was like, if I miscalculated, those Mark 84s came off prior to. I was freaking out the whole way home, wondering, it's like, oh my gosh. Yeah. So Gwin Bob, Shoes, and Chowder, some of our fighter weapons guys all got together and said, no, you did it right. Actually, bombs went long. It's like, oh, thank God.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear, right? I mean, for those who think we're just a bunch of warmongers, no, we don't want to drop on cities.
Exactly. We really hospitals, actively changed attack plan to avoid run-ins, because we knew that our azimuth was always pretty good. But if there was a range error that could...
long or short,
yeah, that could hit, I think there was a dam, electric station right near a dam, and there was we decreased our number of run-in headings because the ones we would have preferred, a range error would have been hitting town. So we just said, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, smart. Okay. Well, I mean, we can go wherever the conversation leads us, but just for fun, again, kind of hashing out the F-111, there's a bit of an alphabet soup with this airplane as well, right? Because you have the suffix, the F-111 all the way up to F, sounds like, or was there even higher? But then
G.
The B was the one they tried to land on a carrier, didn't go too well. But then you have an FB-111, which we have had an episode on, which isn't just an F-111B, it's a whole different airplane, but I think, slightly larger wing. That aircraft also didn't have a nuclear rule?
We all did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure if I can say that now, but yes, and the Lake and Heath and Hayford both had an alert commitment for special weapons.
Right. So you flew together then, what, in England prior to the war? Is that what you said?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
During basically when I got there in '88, I'm not sure when you got there, but we flew together, I'd say half a dozen times together.
Yeah. Rim, you flew both in the back seat of an F4 and then in the side seat of an F-111.
Yeah.
How did that change, if it did at all? Like crew coordination is what we would call it in the Navy. Because at Top Gun, where I was an instructor, we had a whole class for the F crews on not only the division of labor, but the things we should be saying to each other and how to say it and all that. Did you find that between the Phantom and the Aardvark?
Very similar as far as crew coordination.
Yeah.
I mean, in the Phantom, when you didn't see the guy, he's back there. Speaking was very important. You had to basically say everything, especially in both air-to-air and air-to-ground mode. You got to be talking all the time. So that's something they taught me as we went along is if you're thinking it, speak it. Okay, so that's what we did. And so when we got to the F-111, I was talking too much. And finally, they're just like, all you got to do is basically tell me heading, speed, altitude, where we're going next, make sure your weapons are good and, any TF comments you want to make and things like that. So as we went along in the F-111, and especially after we became crewed with somebody, like prior to Desert Storm, they flew us together with our same pilot and Wizzo combination. And Doug and I got to know each other really well. We very, very rarely talked. And if anything came up important, we'd speak out and talk. But other than that, I mean, it was much easier on a side-by-side because you're right with each other.
And what are your primary roles in the F-111? Like in a A6, right? The person is called a bombardier navigator. And an F-18 these days, I think it's an electronic warfare officer, weapons system officer in an F-18. What were you called and what were your primary duties?
Yeah, I was a weapons systems officer.
Okay.
And navigation, weapons systems, communication, talk on the radios, fly the airplane when he wants to take a break, things like that. So I had a lot of stick time flying what they call Wizzo route, or tactical, out there. So basically, route formation is usually about 10 feet out. We're usually about 20 feet out as a Wizzo flying. And so when we got into fingertip again, the weather, I hand the stick back to him and, he takes it for the landing. So it was so basically the multi-role, basically did a lot of stuff in the cockpit. The coordinating the tactics, making sure the navigation on the low level, weapons release, communication. So.
Cool. At that point in time, right, the technology was such that you really needed two people to run it compared to what you see these days where everything's presented to the one person. Gwin Bob, how was the F-111 to fly? I mean, compared to you'd flown the T-38 and...
The T-38 was an airplane you didn't get into, you put on. And it's absolutely the best flying. So, but pretty small, high performance.
Yeah.
Going that to the F-111, the F-111 was a very difficult airplane to fly.
Really?
It was heavily wing loaded.
Right.
So it would shed speed like nobody's business. If you G'd the airplane up, let's say you're going 600 knots, full afterburner, and you G the airplane up, you will go from 600 knots to 300 knots in about 6 seconds.
Wow. And G it up meaning 5, 6?
Well, 600 knots, going a little bit downhill, you could pull very briefly 7.3 Gs. So that's what the airplane was rated for. But unless you were doing a really steep slice back, there was no way you're keeping the energy because the induced drag with all that wing loading was just insane.
Yeah. That
meant airspeed could get away from you. The airplane didn't have a single set of flying characteristics. It changed at every wing speed. So I know the T-38 and probably the same with the F-18, you knew when you're max performing the airplane, you start getting burble. You start feeling like you're running over a little bit of a gravel road. The F-111, it would do that at 35 wing and do it a lot later at 54 wing. At 72 wing, you'd be spinning before you got. And that was another curious thing about the airplane. Fuselage is very wide, single vertical stabilizer, and then you got that aardvark nose going way out the front that's fairing in that really wide radar dish. Well, at high angles of attack, that really wide fuselage, it's carrying all the gas, it gives it all the range, it makes it a heavy airplane, and what we all talked about before, starts blanking out the vertical stabilizer. And it is the only airplane ever built that I know of that would spin before it stalled.
Yikes.
Yeah. There's none of this, oh, nose drop, and then if you keep hauling it in and kick it in some rudder,
right.
No, it'll go, see ya.
Yeah.
And there was no recovering from it.
Really?
We've lost a number of airplanes where the airplane would spin.
Yeah.
Lost one in a holding pattern.
Yeah. I'm no aircraft designer, but I understand it. The way the tail, I don't know if it'll work for this camera, right? But if you, with enough angle of attack, it blocks the tail. Isn't that why some of these aircraft, F-22, F-18, a few others, will have them kind of angled out so that they should still get some clean air?
Yeah, I know that's why they went to twin vertical stabilizers and then to canting them outwards, is to maintain positive directional stability, which that airplane didn't have. And then, oh wait, there's more. The airplane, one of the first things he did was a demo, where a wing sweep demo. So you get the wings back, you go in about 300 knots or so, and you turn the airplane upside down.
Okay.
And now the engines are way below. They're down at the bottom, right? And so now rotate the airplane back to wings level. And you move the stick, and nothing happened. Because the only thing you had to lift those engines up, the airplane didn't have ailerons. It had spoilers. And so they popped up to get to spoil lift over the downgoing wing. Well, they were completely locked out at 54 because they past that point, they're useless. And if you get the wings back all the way to 72, all you have are what we call the staberons. Because they stabilizers, elevator, aileron.
Okay.
Did it all.
Yeah.
And they're really close to the center line of the fuselage. And you're not going very fast. And then you'd hit the stick, and seriously, nothing happened. And the only way you could get the airplane to roll was to unload, take some G off the airplane, get a little, and then a little bit more airspeed, get some rudder, and then, a little bit of rudder to help it out. Where that gets real critical is at Red Flag, some guys were going through the Willie Pete range, and they entered the range about 600 knots, and they're starting to do their jinking and jiving to, react to stuff. And they had the wings way back because they're going 600, got the airplane down to 300, and did a ridge crossing maneuver.
Uh-oh.
And you know what those are? You roll upside down so you don't highlight yourself to heaters from somebody behind you. So what were they not able to do at that point?
Roll.
Yeah. Bam.
Oh, dang.
So the airplane was
Yikes.
much harder to fly. I got a little bit of stick time in F-15. That's a dream to fly. The 111 was just hard all the time. Would rip your head off if you gave it half a chance.
Well, isn't that why the F-15 was so good, right? John Boyd and a few others who derided the F-111 as the idea of a fighter because it was so heavy, the wing loading and everything you talked about. It's like, no, let's build one. Of course, then they gold-plated it a little bit. Still a great fighter, no doubt. And then finally you did the lightweight fighter competition, et cetera. I'd love to have a show on John Boyd. But at any rate, that's cool that you got to fly the F-15.
Yeah, when I was at weapons school, I got a sortie in that. And that was really cool. But that proved the F-15E is not quite as good an air-to-ground airplane as the F-111.
Okay.
But it's a hell of a lot better air-to-ground airplane than the F-111 would have been an air-to-air fighter. So you can go from an air-to-air roll to air-to-ground with reasonable success. The other way is the other way is just not going to work.
What's fun about conversations like this is I always notice my guests have certain terminology that makes sense in the moment, but I've never heard before. You threw out, I think, Wing 32. These shirts, by the way, is that what we're seeing here, right?
Yeah, there's three different wing. Right here, we got 72 is the first one, which is full aft, and 54 is our normal attack.
So that's just if a wing could be straight out, that would be, I guess, 0,
16,
right?
16 degrees was
but the point,
wing
right? But just thinking trigonometry here, and then just measuring back from that is the angle from perpendicular to the fuselage.
Completely manual wing sweep.
Okay.
So there was nothing. I think F-14 was automatic, I think.
I've heard people talk about it had certain modes, but I'm not going to pretend.
Ours was completely manual, and you really set the wing sweep. Now, on a landing, you'd be either 16 degrees or 26 for landing or takeoff, maybe 26, depending on your landing CG. For low altitude, it'd be 35 to 60 typically. And it really depended on what you were doing. If we were daytime doing tack spread, then it'd be 35 because you'd be doing a lot of maneuvering. Nighttime, if we had a long stretch, we were going straight, you put the wings back at 60, and they'd combat tuned the engines. And if you tap just a little bit of afterburner, it'd be going 660 knots with the wings back at 60. We couldn't tap very much afterburner. Now, we could go really, really fast. I saw 932 knots on the deck at Red Flag once.
Wow.
The issue with that, there's two issues. One, you're drinking tankers worth of gas.
Yeah.
And at night, there's 60 feet of burner flame coming out the back of the airplane. And you're going over the desert area of Iraq where it's fine. They can see you from 20 frickin' miles away. So the first stage afterburner that flame was contained completely within the burner can. And so we could go to one stage of burner, run it up to 660, and then back it up to mill power. And then the speed would gradually bleed back to 600, and then so 660 to 600, wings back at about 60 degrees, and the airplane just was really fast.
Wow. Were these, by the way, graduations you could hit with the throttles, or was it just, you're in the first stage, and was it a continuum, or was it like clicks?
You go over the hump, and we had a nozzle
Okay.
indicator, I think, if memory serves, that you could see as the nozzle changed, that you could see where you were.
Okay.
We had 5 zones of afterburner, so
could you feel each one, or was it just like a continuum?
It was really smooth. You really couldn't feel it.
Yeah. All right. So what happens to let's start telling some Desert Storm stories, but let's lead up to it. Where are you two in August of 90, right? Because as I understand it, I was in college, but anyone who was, and I talk about this a lot on the show, it's like, look, I don't want a war, but if there's going to be one, I don't want to sit out. So I want to know where you guys were in August and how you got tapped to go.
Well, it's all fuzzy. Okay, a lot of brain cells were going between then and now.
This was a long time ago, admittedly.
But basically, I believe the squadron was deployed to Turkey on a normal WTD weapons deployment to Incirlik. And we ended up going, I got something right. Cool.
Is that where you met your wife?
It is, yes.
All right, you said that earlier. That's cool.
Yeah, so it was about that time frame too. So basically, we went there. We're doing normal air to ground, low level work up out the Konya range and planning, and then a lot of tensions going on in the Middle East during that time. And yeah, we were there from August. At least I was there from August on. I think we had some squadron swap outs for the 55th and 77th during that time. But that's all, like I said, hazy. But we were there throughout the fall and winter of 1990.
We were in the middle of our weapons training, WTD deployment to Incirlik, Turkey, when Saddam invaded Kuwait.
Okay.
And we were basically the only forces in the region. And the next day, CNN ran some video showing us taxiing for takeoff. And the Pentagon had supplied that to them, implying without quite stating that we had deployed there overnight. Not exactly true.
Sounds like something my 16-year-old says to us, like manipulate the facts a little bit.
Yeah, it's like we didn't say that. They got a little Clintonian on that. But we rotated out at the end of our 3-week deployment. And then the 77th, one of the other squadrons came, and the 55th came.
Okay.
And so they were doing the normal rotation. And I have no idea, I don't know if Rim has any idea either. They decided, whoever they is, and when the 55th came back, the 79th was going to go down and stay until whatever happened was over.
In Turkey?
In Turkey.
Okay.
And so I think it was in October we went down. I have no idea why they chose our squadron. No earthly idea. Anyway, they did, and we went down. We were down there, I think, from the middle of October through February-ish, mid-February. And that worked out really well for us because we spent the entire time doing formed crew workups. So we flew with the same guy all the time.
Oh, like you flew with Doug, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. That's why you didn't fly together, is because you both got crewed with someone else?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we knew we were going to have to be doing low level. And the big difference here is in training, TFR is a pretty intense environment. And so you'd always had to fly a route daytime before you flew it at night. In Europe, the restrictions were so onerous that we could almost never operate below 1,000 feet, the highest altitude for the TFR. And so it was just really hard to train just because of all the peacetime restrictions, really hard to do. But when we got down to Turkey, then we could, okay, now this is real now. And we developed some techniques that worked out really well where the Wizzos, they can see the whole ground in front of me, see a map, and they give you like radar gyro vectors, easy left, easy right, left, right, so 15 or 30 degrees of bank, and they could run us right down canyons.
Each statement has its own meaning to the pilot, right?
Yeah, and so if he says easy left, then I'm going to 15 degrees of bank, and he'll say left, I'll go to 30, roll out. And it was really rugged terrain up there in northern Iraq and Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
That radar was like incredible. You could actually, if you break out the tilt and gain perfectly, you can actually make out fence lines, barbed wire fence lines. And then the terrain just stood out at you like a 3D map. And basically we were, like you were saying, we did that in the daytime. We were flying these canyons, rolling 90 degrees in between these canyons and stuff. But at nighttime, we were actually doing a lot of terrain masking with the radar.
We could only go to 30 degrees.
Yeah, at night.
Well, the airplane, if you hit 45, it'd go, that's it, I'm done, and then do a fly up. But the 111 TFR would fly between two obstacles that were more than 150 feet apart. It's twice the wingspan of the airplane.
Wow.
So you could put the airplane right up against, 70 or 80 feet away from a cliff, and a TFR would be perfectly happy with that. It was really exciting to see it during the day because he's... rim,
whoever.
He's in there and he's giving me directions and I'm just moving the roll. I'm not touching the pitch at all. I'm going, whoa, Nelly. There's no way they could see that airplane coming.
Yeah. Wow. Hold on though, Rim. You had said the radar could do that. What was the distinguishing factor? Was it the Wizzo or was it just that particular jet's radar, how well it was groomed?
I think it's a combination of both, but it takes a lot of technique and experience to get the tilt and gain and elevation right on the radar to break it out the way you want to. And there's a lot of touchy-feely getting to play with the thing, but the radar, if you just turned it on and just had it out there, it'd just be a bunch of stuff. It would be a
Rorschach plot.
So you got to really tilt and gain and stuff manually, but when you did, it just stood out.
Now, I've never been to Turkey, but I have been to a lot of places in the Middle East where folks were deployed more in the sand. How was Turkey compared to some of your folks that were further south of you? It sounds like probably better stationing, all things considered.
Let's see. Why don't you start?
You talking about flying or?
Well, when you're not flying too. But...
Well, it was a great place to be. There's a lot of things to do off base as far as shopping and things like that, and going around but the squadron life was great there. A lot of guys stayed in tents. A lot of guys, the Tigers, basically, we had the Blue Bats.
Since we were there first, we got the TDY quarters, or Quonset huts.
Okay.
So we got paid TDY.
Hmm.
The whole time. The guys that came after us, they lived in tents and they were on field rats, so they didn't get TDY. I still feel a little badly about that sometimes.
Yeah.
So Doug and I actually, we made out. I have a friend on base. They had evacuated off the base back to the States. They gave us their house. So we had a 2-story house with cable TV, and so I never saw these guys.
And again, I've read about Scud attacks to different bases down in the South. Were you susceptible to any type of Scuds or?
We got put into code 4, whatever, the MOP 4 alert a few times.
Okay.
I figure we're in a hardened shelter.
Yeah.
If a Scud comes through, it doesn't matter whether you're wearing the damn gas mask or not. So the guys in Saudi, they weren't drinking beers. We're in Turkey. We go down to the package store, so we'd be at the concrete beach hanging out. Anyway, it was a bit of a Top Gun kind of environment. The movie. We weren't nearly as muscly, glistening kind of as that. But
well, you were Navy guys. I mean, come on.
I know. We did have that going against us, but it was really unique working out of Turkey. The other thing that was super unique about that was that we were the first time that they had what they call a Expeditionary Force. We had every aircraft for the package on base.
Oh, wow.
It was really, we kind of pioneered that with Red Flag, because that's kind of how Red Flag was run.
Mm-hmm.
But now we were doing it for real. And we had the tankers, the AWACS, EC-130s, AC-130s, F-16s, F-15s, F-111s.
B-52s from Barksdale.
And then
all there on that one?
No, they were on the...
They flew in and joined us.
Yeah. We would coordinate with them. They came in from Fairford. They deployed to Fairford. But we had all the types on base, which made it a hugely more effective, coordinated package, since you could get everybody you needed to right in one briefing room.
I would think at the beginning you did that, but as the missions went on, did it become more and more standard, or did you get together every time?
You're right. At the beginning, it was we were really working stuff out.
Because there's routes to get in, there's rules of engagement, there's all this stuff you got to, and that doesn't, for the most part, change. So then it's like, what are we doing today? Okay, got it. You know, you could send that out.
So yes, as our first week was low altitude, and then we went up, we decided that terrain impact on TFR was our greatest threat. So we went up to medium altitude, and that required some reworking some stuff. But once we got through the altitude sort and all that, it really was very much much more automatic kind of thing.
I read a book about the tornadoes' early days of Desert Storm, and they got their butts kicked flying around at low altitude. Of course, they were also attacking airports and runways and all that.
Well, the thing that got them was they were using Durandal, which was a runway penetrating munition. The way that thing works is it pops off the airplane and parachute comes out to slow it down, and then as it swings down, when it senses that it's vertical, it fires a rocket into the pavement. But for that to work, I think they had to deliver it at 300 feet. And you had to be going right down the runway.
Mm-hmm. Which is somewhat predictable.
Well, yeah. So you just put your AAA guns on either end of the runway. It was, we had the weapon for a while and hated it because we knew the employment of it was not reliable because the weapon didn't just swing straight down. It coned. And so it could be going all over the place. And it just wasn't effective. We got rid of them, and those guys got shot down because they were delivering Durandal every time, right down the runway.
So the AAA, in my opinion, was a bigger threat than the terrain. I mean, you had to have a lot of trust in the TFRs, and they had a triple redundant, which by definition is redundant, but it's a triple redundant system that gave you a 4G fly-up if anything happened in the system that it detected. In my opinion, flying that first mission in the Gulf War was the AAA was a much bigger threat.
Well, I see that the difference in our opinion on this comes from the fact that I was always 4-ship flight lead.
Yeah, we were number 3.
And so I'd be the first guy over the target. And they had no idea where they were. Well, once I went over the target, then they knew, then the target area is completely lit up. So 2, 3, and 4, AAA definitely was a threat to them. For me, it was like la-di-da.
So you're doing a 4-ship at night? How close? Because you're not wearing night vision goggles, right?
No, we're not wearing goggles. What we really was mostly administrative to get 4 airplanes off the airfield in pretty quick succession, and then coordinate TOTs and ground tracks. So we come in from different axes and have TOTs that make sure that none of the frag from the guy before us is still in the air. But once we took off, we'd go in pairs, a route formation. And then we'd hit a point where we'd split off, and then we flew our separate low levels.
Yeah, because you don't need to be at however many hundred of feet from Turkey all the way down. Just at some point, you need
we stepped down. We were at low level by the time we crossed the border, but we stepped down to stay underneath their horizon.
What was a typical altitude you might see on the radar altimeter as you're in the tactical terminal phase there? Like 100 feet, 200, 550?
We would go at 400 feet typically. Okay. If you started getting shot at, then we'd run it down to 200.
And is that something you're doing with a stick or a dial?
A dial. His dial was 2, 4, 2, 3, 4, 500, 750, and 1,000. Okay. So, and then you had different ride qualities. You could be soft, medium, and hard.
Meaning how quickly it's going to bounce around
push you over the edge with a certain negative
G. How close it would get to an obstacle before pulling. So in hard ride, it would go up to an obstacle until it needed 4 Gs. Not really good use of energy and painful.
Because you get surprised by 4 Gs.
Yeah, and a negative 1 G pushover over the...
Oh, yeah.
And so what we would do is go to a medium ride, get a much further pull out, and depending, like if it was a pretty big climb, as we reached the top, we'd go to hard to get the pushover going the other side.
Okay.
But typically medium ride, 400 feet. Almost never. I think I went down to 200 feet once to escape some guns.
Which in peacetime, we never went below 1,000 feet, pretty much, except in the UK, there's one low level you can go down to 400 feet at night.
It's certified. They know there's not power lines and everything, right?
Yeah.
So wartime, suddenly it's like, okay, this is for real. Now we're gonna, okay. Well, I don't know if we just want to talk about the opening night, if you all flew, or if there's a particular night that would make the best story here. But
we both flew the second night.
Okay.
I was the high time guy in the Squadron Fighter Weapons School grad, so I kind of got put in charge of mission planning. I was in charge of planning the mission for the first night. So Kevin and I both for the second night.
Well, hold on. So you didn't fly the event you planned? You planned it for someone else or what? So they could get the rest they needed or something?
It was just really complicated. And we had to get a process down.
Okay.
For people now, I might as well be talking about the Peloponnesian War, practically, because it was so different then. Nothing digital. We had paper maps, drawn lines, pulling headings, writing down, the flight plan. Had to figure out ballistics, decide what weapons you're going to use.
I think the highest technology we had there was the box we programmed the offsets in. I can actually put in feet, lateral, longitude wise, the offsets to a target.
Like if the target's hard to find, but something near it is easy to find.
And normally we'd have like 4 or 5 offsets per target. And so we're out there calculating on the map, what that offset is and put that in the box. And we turn it with a little screwdriver to make sure that the offsets are right. And then when the crew comes, they take that box and they plug it in. And that's what they're actually using for their offsets on their mission. So.
Okay. Well, between the time zone changes and when there was a deadline, I think it was January 15th. So what was the first night? Was it 16th or 17th?
The morning of the 17th, I believe.
So like after midnight on the 17th. So you flew what? After midnight on the 18th?
18th, yes.
Okay. All right. Let's hear about it.
Okay, so that first mission, we came in and alarms went off prior to us getting to the squadron, and we had like 10 of us in the van. Alarms went off. We weren't even at the gate yet. This guard wouldn't let us in. So we're all running down into the ditch and we're covering up, for the alarm going off because
there's
incoming
inbound,
scuds possibly.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're doing that and they gave us the all clear. We finally got through. We cussed out the guards for not letting us into the squadron. We're yelling at them. Says, we're crew. We want to get to our jets. So we ended up going in that first night that we flew. The mission plan was already pretty much done. Like Gwin Bob said, the other team did it. We basically had 2 teams, A team, B team. And so Doug and I get out to the jet. Our target that first night was a GCI site just in Kirkuk. And they we're using CBU-58 cluster bombs. And basically, we went in, departing on the ramp, which was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Probably earlier than that, probably closer to midnight. But we ended up going out and taxiing out. Padre, who's our squadron chaplain, was there, blessing us all and praying for us as we go out. And we slid him. We go out and we're basically taking off in as a package. What was about 20-second departures?
For the 111s, it was 10 seconds.
10 seconds. You see, I forget so much. But anyway, going out, taking off, and keeping the guy in front of us lit up, basically turning off all of our lights, our IFF, everything like that. And sometimes we hook up with a tanker, sometimes we don't, depending on how far into Iraq we go. Heading down on the low level itself, Doug and I go down and we're in basically the eastern mountains of Iraq, heading southbound and drop down the TFRs. I wrote about this in a book. I never published it. I think I sent you a copy of it, but it goes into more detail than I'm giving here.
Okay.
But we actually popped through a thin layer of clouds, dropped down to about 400 feet, watching the hills, and it's all dark. I'm going back and forth between air to ground, air to air, making sure we're staying behind number 2 because we were number 3 in the package. Coming in, I'm seeing this light coming right at us, and as we start to climb, the light starts going down. I was like, what the heck? And as we start to come over the hill, the thing goes away. It was a truck on a road heading towards us on the road. So I'm seeing that happen, and we're comfortable at 400 feet. The TS were twerping at us, and it's basically the TFRs. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So I'm monitoring the TFRs the whole time and navigating, making sure that we're on course, on time. We got to stay within 30 seconds of our points, so we're staying in with the package at the right time. So every so often I go back to air scope and make sure that we're right behind number 2. Going into the IP, pushing up to 540 knots, getting our systems armed up. I'm in the scope. Basically, I'm looking for my offsets. The GCI site, like Guinnbob said, was on a hill. Not
just a hill. It was on a very steep ridge, 3,000 feet above the surrounding terrain.
See, I don't remember that part of it.
I planned it.
You planned it.
Your mind might have blocked it.
Yeah, but I found my offsets, which was basically a small town to the south and then a river bend, and these things stood out like crazy, and I was really comfortable with that. Basically, I'm watching the scope go off on an angle, and by the way, the radar and the bars that the pilot looks at are tied together. So if I have a cursor and I'm moving the cursor on the target or something, that bar is moving as well, and he's following those bars. So I'm watching the bars go off and go, Doug, check the bars, because I'm looking at the scope. He goes, get out of the scope and look. So I look outside and there's like AAA everywhere because 1 and 2 just dropped and we're on our way. And I was like, okay, you take care of your stuff. I'm getting back in the radar.
I'm safer in here.
I said a quick prayer and I said, oh dear God, let us get these bombs off. I don't care what happens after that. And so sure enough, about 10, 15 seconds later, I seen the scope right up, and it's like we climb up to 300 feet, arm the weapons. We're down around 1 or 200 feet manually, I think, at that point. Try to stay in below all this AAA. And, oh, by the way, there was a SA-6 launch during that time, too. And we had an ALQ-131 pod that was doing the smart jamming. And so it was lighting up like a Christmas tree, doing all its work, something that no human could do. But it was amazing. It sensed what, I can't go into too much of it, but basically it sensed the frequency and jams appropriately. So climbed up the appropriate altitude, got the bombs off, and they all came off good, no issues. And then we headed north, dropped it down 100 feet, full afterburner, and got out of Dodge. And by that time, the bombs were going off, and I just looked outside, and it was like daytime. All the bombs going off just lit. I mean, these weren't like Mark 82s or Rockeye or things that are going to just explode big. These are just bombless, but man, it still looked like daytime outside. So, anyway, we were heading north, and we're still lights off. Everything.
Just want to interject one thing.
Yeah.
EC-130 that was orbiting over Turkey, monitoring that EWGCI site at the TOT, gone.
Nice.
Never heard from again.
Yeah, they gave us a DFC for that.
Nice.
So anyway, we ended up climbing up, turned on our lights, and saw the whole package. We joined up and headed home. So,
Wow. How long was that whole flight? Like, what did you log in your logbook?
oh gosh, ask me that. I think it was 2.3. I think.
I mean, so that's relatively short, right? The folks that came up for Libya, what they 14
11
or
to
so?
14 hours.
Yeah.
That was about 45 minutes going from Incirlik to the part of the Turkish border that it shared with Iraq, which was between Syria on one side and Iran on the other. There's about a 40-mile gap in there that we went through all the time. So that was 45 minutes either way.
Still a mess.
And then depending on
33
how
minutes
far
later.
we went further and further south as the war went on. But the initial was right around 2.4.
Everybody came home?
Everybody came home.
I'm sure you looked over the airplane real well.
We got back. It's funny. We looked it over real well. There was a bullet hole in the tail.
Wow.
And a lot of the guys at Squadron were saying it was my own weapon for that frag back bouncing. I don't think so because we were up pretty high. I mean, it's like, but anyway,
CBU 5871 wouldn't have had any
they
frag.
wouldn't have had any frag. It was a bullet hole. They fixed it and it was ready to go the next day.
Wow. That's crazy. Goodness. Yeah, the CBU, right? I mean, so what? It falls away and then opens up right away. So
Clamshell opens
it's
up.
almost like having a high drag retarding fin on a bomb, in so much as even though you're low altitude, it's going to fall behind.
Well,
you
then
pretty
bomblets
quickly.
are about this big.
Okay.
And they have some, I can't remember what it is.
They got to spin or fall.
They
for a
spin
certain,
and then they have a flammable liner in it.
Yeah. And you said it was a GCI facility. So are you attacking the actual structure or like the antenna? Or?
Well, it covered an area of between the radars
whatever's
and the
there,
trucks.
vehicles.
That whole area.
Yeah.
It was perfect weapon and thin-skinned. So it was absolutely the perfect weapon for the job. And it just, that EWGCI site
I made
never
out the
came
actual
back.
GCI site within the last 15 seconds before bomb release, by the way.
You said what? Sorry?
I actually broke out the target.
Oh, okay.
I was using offsets up until that point. When we got about 15 seconds prior to release, I was able to break out the target.
Very nice.
And it's like it stood out.
Sounds like good hits.
All the radar hits.
So you were -1 on the second night, but not on this strike?
That was the same. We were hitting different targets.
Oh, okay.
So they were hitting an EWGCI site, and for the life of me, I can't remember what the heck we were hitting on night one. For my first mission, launching the airplane is not easy because there's must be 4 really dense checklist pages to pre-flight the TFR. And I've got to admit, I was a little bit like a well-hit 3-wood in a tile shower. And I'm going through this checklist, and every time I get to this one spot, and it gooned up. So it was checking the aux flight reference system. So we had an error check between the inertial nav and the aux flight that if they went out of a spec, then it would, for one thing, you couldn't TFR, you were done. And so about the 4th time it didn't work, I called maintenance, and so other airplanes are taxiing now. And they say, well, we want you over in last chance. We're going to pull the amplifier for the aux flight reference system. Now that's in front of the left intake, about this far in front. So I've shut down the left engine, and it has 80 fasteners on it. And these guys, nowadays, with these
wrenches.
battery-powered, things, you get your boop, 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 and they must still have RSI injuries in their elbows for running that. There's like 80 of these darn fasteners. Panel comes off. Amplifier comes out because it's the easiest thing to do. Put the amplifier back in. new amplifier in, run the checks again, blows it at the same spot, and time is just moving on. Amplifier out, gyro in, amplifier in. It works! Now they're spinning this panel back on, and we had a no later than takeoff time to meet because we had to get to the target. And this is one thing we kind of calculated because we could go faster, but you'd burn fuel doing faster. So we still had to have enough fuel. So it was like, how late can we take off and catch up with the package and make our TOT and have enough gas when you get back? And the whole Thundering Herd's gone. We're lonely out there by ourselves. And they get the panel on, and I tell the weapons guys, just pull the pins right here. Don't wait out to end around. We just need to pull the pins here. And I did like 3 things you never do. You never taxi single engine the F-111. So I taxied single engine.
Except for night 2 of a war.
35 knots was a limiting taxi speed. And we had about a 1/4 mile drag from the Hazes to the approach end of the runway. I think I saw 75 knots.
Well, you were thinking about taking off soon, so you
and
just
I was
wanted
like,
to test.
God, I have no idea how, because everybody's standing on top of the squadron building watching this. Oh, God, okay, I guess I'll get one. And just barely made it off in time.
Wow.
Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of things we didn't have sorted out. And one of the things was not hitting tankers. We had a tanker I'd just taken off. I was going through 7,000 feet, and a tanker went over my head so close I saw the director lights underneath it. So we almost hit a tanker.
Hit in the bad sense of the word hit.
Yeah. And then, funny aside, we have a chaff flare switch. And it was in front of the throttles. It was really quite a reach. The switch was only about that high. And so you'd push forward for chaff and flare and back for chaff. I don't know whichever one it was. I think it was forward for chaff and flare. And one of the maintenance guys heard us complaining about it. And we had these soap sample the oil sample tubes. And he found out that, well, he just cut off about that much. And it'd be an interference to fit over the switch. So it was a lot easier to reach. Well, you know how guys are. If 1 inch is, if that's good, then, and pretty soon you get these, you couldn't close a canopy over these things. They were stuck on the switch. And so what happened to me was the aux gyro was starting to tilt again, the standby ADI. Standby ADI was starting to tilt. And I'm thinking, well, if we're back to this original problem again, then there's no point us going any further because the airplane won't TF. Well, the way to figure that out is you switch the platform from primary to aux. And that will slave the main ADI to the aux reference gyro. And if they're both tilted, then you know the aux flight reference system is going toes up again. So I reach forward, and that switch is right next to the chaff and flare switch with its really long tube, and the tube kind of going up my glove. I didn't even feel it. So much, lever was so long, I didn't even feel the thing.
It's coming, right?
And I'd never dropped a flare, ever.
Really? Wow.
Just not something we ever did. And I had no idea what it would be like. Well, found out.
Lights up.
First of all, it lights up the sky. And in order, it has to be this like shiny thing to distract the missile from your engine. So that means it has to torch off right next to the airplane. Well, that's directly underneath the horizontal stabilizer. And that's a pretty significant thermal shock. The airplane went, it was a thump. The airplane thumped, sky lit up. I didn't realize I'd done anything. And what we knew had happened was one of the engines had let go. Because that was one of the things that happened to 111s was the turbine wheel had come apart. And so there was a bold face for that, which was, well, you get a fire light. So a fire push button to press, agent discharge, switch up. And there was actually a 3-step bold face because the next step in the bold face is ejection handle, squeeze, and pull because it never worked. The airplane turned into a Roman candle and, then eventually you'd be out of the airplane. So we're staring at the engines going, okay, what?
Waiting for the light to come on.
Like a dog staring at a big wristwatch, all interest and no comprehension. And Clyde, my right seater, big panel, all these different numbers and dials. He happened to notice the flare counter went down by 1. This is a little number about this big. I don't even know what caused him to look at it.
Good on him.
And he goes, it was like 3 minutes of us waiting to figure out, oh, hey, we just punched off a flare. Oh, well, okay.
At least we know the system works.
And then I checked, and it turned out that the aux flight had
Oh,
just
my goodness.
precessed a little bit, so I pulled the knob to set it up. And we had another guy, you probably heard this on the radio, we had this thing set up with the weasels where when they're shooting their harms, those things were giant rockets. And they had a mode where they'd launch it on a radar, and if the radar blinked, went off, then this rocket would just go, and it had a lot of motor on it. It could go up to 80,000 feet, and that gave it a lot of hang time to hope the guy would turn it on again. AWACS said, well, we'll be calling picture clear if there's nothing around, and Wheels just said, well, we're gonna call Magnum if we're launching one of these things because it'll get your attention. And one of our planes had turned to the south for a western target and heard picture clear and Magnum, and then separate that by about 15 seconds from Mayday, Mayday, Mayday.
Uh-oh. And
And what happened was, pilot who shall remain unnamed, call him Voldemort, he sees the harm launch and he thinks he's been jumped by a MiG and he's been shot at. So he goes to full afterburner in a brake turn. Now he's at 23,000 feet in a fully loaded F-111 dragging CBU 5871. And that thing was coming out of the sky like a grease safe. And so he does this brake turn. And then he went full afterburner. His thumb hits that plastic thing, push it forward, and off goes a flare. He thinks he's been hit.
Yeah.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. And then punched off his stores.
Oh.
In as tight a turn, I used probably three or four Gs, so not a super, but very, in a 111, you never did that because you're going to...
He's still in Turkey, by the way.
You're going to clean off your horizontal stabilizers.
He's flying over Turkey at this time?
Yeah, he's still over Turkey. So your weapons are going to, typically what they're going to do is they're going to back up, the wing wash is going to get them, and they have ripped fuel tanks in half.
Yikes.
Near as we can figure, it was pulling hard enough so that the weapons actually went between the wing and the horizontal stabilizer because it didn't actually hit any part of the airplane, but it should have done. And now we're doing this death spiral, and the Wizzo recovered the airplane, and they were the first ones home.
Did he get a new call sign out of it, I hope? Well, anyway, we said we wouldn't say who
I think
it was.
they named the mountain peak after him, I think.
Yeah.
Wow.
They did.
Hold on, but that was someone else's story. What did you
Okay,
end up doing?
so we continue to the west, or the east, and we're going the far eastern side, turn south, do step down. And I had a similar thing that like Grim talked about. But we're doing left, right, down low, 400 feet, going really fast. We're coming out of high terrain, so we really are cooking. And I see this light swing around and coming right at us. And I'm thinking, well, we're dead. That's a SAM coming off the rails, and we're...
Just
and there was about...
pulled right away. And
Well, no, it's like I had about... It was about 3/4 of a second where my brain's first thought was, we're dead. Oh, no. That's a truck on a road above us. And he's come around a hairpin around the ridge line, and that's what I saw is his light swinging around.
Jeez.
And we were doing, I'm sure, better part of 600 at this point. And we were about 80 feet to the right of him and about, 75 or maybe 100 feet below him. And 111 going that fast, you can't hear it coming at you. So this guy's minding his own business, and suddenly he's as close as you get to a jet without actually getting hit by it. He's probably still cleaning his trousers.
Well,
out.
and all of a sudden out of nowhere, because it's not like you had lights like he did.
No. Yeah,
so all of a sudden he
nothing.
just hears this gargantuan sound, and it's gone just as fast as it arrives. My goodness. All right, well, so he was probably doing something nefarious at that hour anyway. I mean, come on, what's he doing driving on a
There you go.
hillside?
Yeah.
And then, it was probably 5 minutes or so after that. And we're getting a couple SA2 marks on our, whatever, the EWGCI scope, whatever the heck that thing was called. And then the airplane goes into a fly-up. Well, we had practiced. One of the things we did during the day was we had what we call an E-scope. It's a logarithmic scope that the TFR uses to create its picture for how it's going to command the airplane. I won't even try bothering to describe it, except it's very abstract. It's kind of like looking at a slice of the earth and logarithmically, so the distance is compressed the further away. But we figured out that if I don't want to do a fly-up maneuver, but I still have the E-scope, can I hand fly this thing? So you paddle it off and you stay focused. And we could do it. I'd get down to 400 feet or so, and we wouldn't want to do it for very long. So the airplane's doing a fly-up, and I'm hand flying it about 400 feet, SA-2 blinking over there, and I'm like totally locked up. And Clyde, my right seater, John Frame, great guy, he looks at me and he goes, why don't you switch radar channels? Radar altimeter channels, because we had 2 radar altimeters, and that would hop between them so that it can compare the altitudes. So that way you couldn't get a single channel failure and cause the airplane to go into a ground under certain circumstances. I'm like, oh, yeah. That thing.
Brilliant.
I'll do that thing.
That's what whistles are for.
That's right. Yeah.
Push the switch, and suddenly we're going back. Boop, 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 boop. We're just scooting along. Made it to the target, got our weapons off on time, on target as far as I know. And then as we turned northbound, we had our black line went right over what we did not know was one of Saddam's nuclear research things, whatever they were doing. And we're out in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly it's guns like you cannot, I'm sure you've seen the video on TV, see CNN and all that stuff.
Sure.
You're seeing the tracers.
That's right.
And that's about it. Well, your eyes have a much greater dynamic range than a camera does. So you're seeing the tracer, every bullet between the tracers. You're seeing S-60 rounds. You can actually see the shells coming out of that because they're the bigger guns. So you can see the Quad 23s and the bigger guns, the S-60s. And it was pretty impressive. They had depressed their guns as far as they could. Well, they didn't depress them all the way so we wouldn't shoot each other. It was good. So you just pick the dark spot, kind of 200 feet, go scooting through. And I remember we were more than probably 150, 200 feet away from one of the Quad 23 sites. And I could see from the muzzle flashes, I could see all the guys that were working the gun.
Future target.
Wow.
So anyway, then we were on our way out, climb out, come back. And now there's another thing we hadn't really had time to rehearse. And I think we had more airplanes the second night to the first night. The EFs weren't really there on the first night. We didn't have quite as many assets. We had this whole wall of airplanes coming back. And everybody is doing their best check ride radio calls. Repeat the headings, repeat the altitudes. And it's like, oh no, just please just say your call sign. And so we jammed our own radios, Rapcon frequency, and I'm sure the Rapcon guys, they just dove under their desks and hid because there's nothing they could do. It was just massive airplanes. And fortunately, the weather was good. I think if the weather hadn't been good, we'd have put some airplanes in the med.
Yes. It got bad, I think, a couple of days into the conflict. But hold on, I want to ask something you said. You said the black line went over a nuclear. Was that on your chart?
Yeah, where we drew what we call.
You guys are just drawing a black line.
We're just drawing a line over now.
Yeah, okay.
Our intel people never bothered to tell us this. I guess they didn't think it was important.
Well.
So as we're coming back, I'm on the south side of the field on downwind, and now at this point, I'm just looking for an empty spot in the conga line, which is going out over the med. I just keep going until I find one and
turn in.
And turn in. And so I saw one. It was about 4 miles off the end of the runway.
Someone who forgot to turn their lights back on?
Oh, God. Blew my joke.
Dang it. Sorry.
Somebody hand you a script?
No, I could almost predict that one. I mean, because you're coming back. You're like, holy cow, I can't believe we just did that.
Yeah. Well, I make a dive onto final, and Tower says, hey, 111 just rolling out on final. You got a KC-135 at 12 o'clock for 1.5 miles. No, I don't. There's nothing out there.
Until he clicked.
And then made that call again, and then suddenly I've got a windscreen full of KC-135. Yeah. So, well, there's 2 things I could do. One was break out and go all the way out to the med, or I go, I think I got enough gap here. So about 2 miles out on final, I just went to afterburner, fully configured, did a 360 on ILS final, rolled out, and I'm not making any of that up.
Yeah.
I could give you references.
I'll take it at face value.
Pretty intense.
Wow. Were your wheels already down?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay,
I was fully configured.
Yeah,
flaps.
Okay,
I was already, and I basically like you're coming around
Wow.
Like if you're coming on the carrier, you'd be all configured at that point.
Oh, and they have done that to me before. They'll spin you while you're in the clouds, and just to whatever, make sure the deck is ready. And for me, every time I come out of that, because you've been in a turn for a little while, then your ears are all thrashed. It sucks. But all right, my goodness. So how many missions did you all end up flying? I mean, right? The air war went on. What was it? A couple weeks. Ground war was 100 hours, but.
So I flew every other day, 19 missions.
Wow.
Yeah. So basically, it was one day of planning, one day of flying.
When do you rest? In between, I guess.
Yeah, well, yeah. When you're not planning, you're resting. After all the missions come back, you hang out, make sure everybody's back. This is the mission planning night. Everybody lands safely. You go on back home. Even you go down, you lay down, and you get down to about 4 or 5 o'clock. Maybe grab something to eat. 6 a.m. sharp. F-16s are taking off at 30-second intervals. So there was very little. You had to wait for that to go by before you actually got some shut-eye.
Yeah. Well, and that's as a follow-up to being in Turkey during the conflict, what I wanted to ask you. Like for me, not that I was involved in anything like this, but when you go back to the ship is pretty austere relatively, and you know what to expect. The folks going back to Saudi and some of the other bases, they were living in tents. They're getting also scudded and everything else. Was it kind of strange to go back to somewhat normalcy? You said you had a house.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about now, unrelated to our conversation, but I've heard about this and read about this. The guys that live in Las Vegas drive up to Creech, are executing strikes halfway around the world, in some cases killing people and going home before their kids get back from school. That's hard on their brains.
Yeah.
So did you guys experience any kind of
I didn't.
disconnection?
Me personally, I didn't. I considered, basically when I was flying, I was one self. When I wasn't flying, I was another self. And basically the task at hand was to, mission plan, target, get to the target, get the bombs off, and get home, and that was it. And then
compartmentalization.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Again, I think the guys in Creech, it's a little bit of remote what they're doing, but they're still the ones doing it. And then when they get home, it's a normal, their family,
the
kids.
Really tough thing for them. We always went against known, valid military targets.
Mm-hmm.
And we rejected a couple if they were too close to say, sorry, we can't.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah,
actually, right?
We would sometimes reject run-ins. A couple times said, no, we're not hitting that target. There's lots out there. Find something else for us. So we never had the concern that, yes, you wiped out a known killer of Americans, but you may have gotten his family too.
Mm-hmm.
We never had any of that. So there was never any of this really profound moral qualms that I think any decent person would have placed in that. And then plus that, you're going from a military environment and you just like click the switch and now you're back playing with the dog and the kids.
Yeah.
And, I've read about that. It's really tough.
Yeah, for sure. 19 missions, were they similar to the one you explained as far as?
Actually, the first mission I flew, I explained. The second mission was a low level as well. That was actually an abort. It was a low level. It was a higher headquarter abort. We were again number 3 in the package and never got the bombs off. I don't think anybody in our package got the bomb off that day. We all came home with our bombs, and I'm not sure to this day why it was called off.
I don't know. I know
What was the target?
I don't think I flew that night.
I don't remember.
Okay. Do you think it could have had to do with the target?
Because
weather wasn't, right, a really concern if your airplane's
weather was never an issue for us.
For you guys. I think
weather was actually always reasonably clear.
Wasn't there a storm a couple days into Desert Storm?
Maybe down south, but not up where we were.
We lost an F-111 in there with Paul Eichenlob was the EWO. And I'm not sure if that was the night that it actually happened, but they ran their F-111 into the ground.
Oh.
I can't put my dates all together, but I think that might have had something to do with it. I do know that AWACS, after this first couple of days, was basically a non-factor. Basically, they made some mistakes, and they were calling bogeys when they weren't. They were basically our aircraft. So at that time, it was decided the F-15s would do a targeting and sorting of all aircraft in the theater. So
they kept you guys in good shape there. Did you ever do anything with the Navy, or was it all just even within your own wing there? It sounds fairly...
We had some SEALs brief with us a couple of missions, I thought, and doing some lasing for us when we brought the amps.
I did some other things besides fly during the Desert Storm, so I may not have been around when that happened.
Okay.
All right. Did you ever go day raids? You said earlier, no. I think you ended up elevating though, right?
Yeah. So basically, after the second mission, we came back with our weapons. It was decided to go medium altitude, basically between 15 to 25,000 feet, and big targets. And basically it was AAA would never reach us. So it was like a peacetime mission. We basically go out there, fly our low level at 20,000 feet, and basically drop our bombs and turn around and come home. So it was we didn't have to worry about any any SAMs going off, because we had the Wild Weasels, we had the F-111s, and we had the F-15s in case they dared to launch an airplane. So it was just like
they were all wishing they would.
It was just a peacetime mission for us. So that's for the next 15 missions, 16 missions. So
for sure. I want to ask you about the F-111. Is that a totally different aircraft, or could the two of you have jumped in and gone and flown that? I have to think the mission is obviously different, but what about the actual piloting and
the F-111 is essentially identical to the F. I could have flown either one. But like with the F-111, where the mission really is the right seat, he's the guy who gives us reason for being. And the same thing with the F-111, EWO in the right seat. He was
specialized.
So he really, it was very technical, and operating that system to jam what you needed when you needed to jam it and see what needed jamming. It was all.
When you went to nav school, everybody graduated nav school. One went on to fighters, one went on to tankers or bombing, and the third section would go off to be an EWO. So they have a totally different classification and certification as an EWO. They go with a whole special class just for that after nav school.
All right. I'd love to have a show on that. We just have to find the right folks. Probably you two could help. But is theirs all Trons, or was there any kinetic?
No,
what did they drop
all
in?
Trons.
Okay, I thought so. And it had a different paint job, maybe, or
it was gray, and it had a big pod up in the vertical stabilizer that is very characteristic.
Yeah. Good. Now, when you went to the higher altitude, you probably still weren't dropping CBUs, right? Or
no,
you're calling it medium, but
we went to 14. We carried one Mark 82 each on the inboard pylons. Then we had racks where we carried 8 Mark 82s.
Yeah, I was looking at my logbook. I had 8, 12, and 14 Mark 82s on different missions, depending on what the target was. We actually dropped chem on one, which is a combined effects munition, which you could probably go more into detail on that, but it's pretty radical.
Actually, I can't.
Oh, you can't?
Well, thank you for setting me up on that one.
So it was payback for me ruining your story turning behind the KC. How did your squadron make out as far as, you said you lost an F-111. Did your squadron keep everybody? I have to ask.
Yeah, everybody came back. The only bullet hole we took was the one these guys got.
Night one, really?
Yeah,
or two, but night one for y'all. And then were they all about 2.5 hours, or did you end up having to go further south?
We went down to the north side of Baghdad. There was a big kind of, I think their answer to Edwards, Al-Taji airfield, giant military facility.
Was it by a lake?
Yeah, there was a pretty big lake that was maybe, I'm going way back on fuzzy memory, but 25 miles northwest. Okay. We just called it waffle bombing. We were just going to keep dropping these things from 20 some odd thousand feet until Al-Taji just looked like a big old waffle. Jesus. If they wanted something hit, like a specific building, I'd put an F-117 on it. Okay. But we just came in and just...
This was an incredible mission. This was our last mission of the war. We didn't know it at the time, but we went in, and was it 16 airplanes in the package, or is it 12 airplanes in the package? Whatever, I can't remember, but every airplane on the same target with a different DIMPY, which is a different target on the target, carrying 4 Mark 84 2,000 pounders. Oh, wow. We had a requirement to be on each point, our IP, and over target within 10 seconds instead of 30 seconds. The reason for that was we're lights off, we're all coming in from different angles over the target, and we're separated. These guys that planned this were just geniuses, but we ended up, we all dropped our bombs on this target and then headed home. And we had all these rules in case any of these things happen, you'd get out of the package and get out of the way of everybody, because we were so close in altitude and airspace with everybody.
It had to be very precise.
Yeah. And so we all headed back after that. Maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we got back to the debrief, and we're standing there normally. In the debrief, it's just our squadron commander and the package commander. We're talking and going over how things went. Well, we had General Downer in the room. And he basically opened up a printout, basically from George Bush, saying cessation of hostilities. Place went erupted, you know. So it was like based on our time over target. So
wow, yeah, fantastic. Hold on, let's go back to the beginning, because we talked about the different kind of bombing and how hard it was, I guess, in the E compared to the F. What were you flying at this time? Were the E's?
E's, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Did the F, was that a different unit, or did F's come to you at some point?
RAF Lake and Heath.
Okay.
F-111Fs.
Okay. Like you said, they're using what, FLIR or other pods? That
was the probably the best ground attack airplane non-stealth ever.
Wow.
But they had what was called Pave Tack, which was a targeting and laser pod, and they'd see IR, so like having goggles, and it would be slave to the INS and the attack radar so that you can get the thing pointed in the right direction. Then you pick the target out on that you want to hit on the ground, let's say a hardened aircraft shelter. And then they had a laser that would hit what you were designating. And their tactic when they're operating the low levels, and this is, again, something that nobody else could do, is they come in about 600 or so knots, and they pull up to 4G pull to 45 degrees nose high, and let the bomb go. Now, as long as they're kind of in a basket,
right,
weapon has enough energy to get there.
And it's not a dumb bomb.
And it's laser guided.
Right, exactly.
And so as long as you don't give it too much maneuvering to do, as energy maneuvering equation is working out in the positive, then they'll fling this thing up for about 6 miles out.
Wow.
So the bomb goes whoosh, and it guides on the laser target. And because the pod is directly on the center line of the airplane on the bottom, this is where an advantage it has over the F-15 or F-16 is that there was no pendulum effect or podium effect, that if you got on the wrong side, if you turned out, you could blank, the fuselage would blank the laser. The 111 is right underneath the center of the airplane. And so they'd weapon release, 120, this is all at night, 120 degrees of bank, and you do a pull down, and you do about 120 degrees of turn. So you're kind of doing a wing over and roll out. Meanwhile, the Wizzo, while the pilot's doing this, he's keeping the laser on the target. Yeah. And the bomb would just hit that laser every frickin' time. And so they were doing, with one bomb, what we likely wouldn't have been able to do. We would have PK with how we had to spread out the weapons against something like a hardened aircraft shelter, or maybe 0.2. And they were like 1.00000. One bomb, one shelter, gone. And then they put it back on TFR and scoot on out. So they never had to overfly the target.
That's nice.
And they had super accurate delivery. The only weakness to that is you got to have a clear sky between you. Right. So better than 6 miles of viz. So they did that for about the same week we did. And then everybody agreed we're better off at high altitude. And then they had the next stroke of genius, which was, oh, wait a minute, look what we can see at night with our IR. We can see tanks.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Would they, and so maybe this changed when they went to the higher altitude, would they carry one bomb on a mission, or?
No, they would carry 4.
So on that low altitude mission, would they pickle all 4 or just one?
I don't know.
Or
I know
multiple runs.
I don't think anybody did multiple targets. I really don't know, because I wasn't down there.
Yeah.
Didn't really know any of the guys. All I remember seeing is like a has and looked like one bomb hit it. But on the other hand, if you let 4 of them go all at once, it
depends on the target. That could be overkill. But once they went to the higher altitude and started plinking tanks, there's one.
They put them in a box.
Yeah.
And then just go after targets of opportunity. Just back and forth. They see something, and then when they go Winchester, they go home.
And that's almost a whole separate discussion, because that, of course, means we have to have done some pre-coordination to know that we don't have any friendlies in this area. Or if there is, maybe there's a forward air controller or something along those lines. So, wow, very interesting. My goodness. So did you also end up with 19 missions?
Our mission planning process was really not working very well. So I got pulled off the flying schedule. I flew 3 low levels in the first week, and I was the fire weapons school grad, high-time guy in the wing. So I got pulled off and said, you're not flying again until our mission planning processes are down so that they work. And
down like fixed.
Yeah, fixed.
Yeah, so not down like broken.
Yeah, no. So they were chaotic. We had errors, and we just didn't really have a good process and it was pretty complicated, because we'd get an air tasking order. You have to flip your way. And Saddam should have seen this before he started the war. Our TATO is the size of a medium city phone book.
Evidently, they had to fly it out to the carriers every day.
Yeah, it was huge. Yeah. So if he'd seen that, he might have gone, maybe. So you go flip through,
let's
you find your airplane.
Too much credit, but anyway.
Airplane, and then you target they wanted for us. Then you'd take a look where the target was, maybe reject it, maybe probably keep it. And then I had to decide, or whoever was running the mission planning, had to decide what weapons to use and what fuses to use. We had to coordinate with the B-52s at Fairford, and then we had to talk to all the different mission types. Okay, this is where we're going. This is where the B-52s are going. This is where your cap's going to be. Just all those details, kind of like red flag.
Yeah.
So that would start about 4 or 5 in the afternoon.
For that night's
For the
strike?
mission
Wow.
that'd be taken off at about 2 in the morning.
Okay.
And so it had about 7 hours to get the ballistics done,
All right.
pass the weapons order to the maintenance guy, to the weapons guys so they could load them. Had to draw maps, had to do flight plans, had to do ballistics. And the goal was that when the air crew showed up, they had a package ready. And then I had to stick around, do cleanup after the mission goes. And anyway, it took about 10 days.
To get the processes.
That we had the
repeatable.
processes down,
Yeah.
that I could hand it off. And then we had, anyway, we came off the mission planning and
Yeah.
things started working properly. And then I was working 20-hour days.
Wow.
Because after they came back, then I had to figure out what went wrong, what to do right the next day. I'd go home. I'd probably be back at our bat, which is a lot like the Navy. We had 6 guys in a Quonset hut built for 2. That's as close as I got to. Anyway,
Anyhow.
I got pneumonia about the 8th day of that. So they finally let me go from the mission planning thing. And then the stupid flight surgeon wouldn't let me fly no matter how much I jumped up and down. Then I got sent off with AWACS, F-15, F-16, and maybe one other guy. We all got in a King Air, and we spent 5-6 days flying to different Turkish Air Force bases and giving them briefings on our operations.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then I got back from that. The flight surgeon finally got tired of hearing my whining and let me fly again. And so I flew 12 total missions, but I missed a whole chunk there. They
Right,
flew
in
us.
the
They tried to fly us every other day.
Yeah.
They never flew us 2 days in a row.
So was Clyde grounded as well then?
Yeah, he was.
Oh,
he was stuck with me getting this thing all straightened out.
I think I know the answer to this. I'll ask anyway, because most of the ground stuff was in the South. Did you get involved with helping once the ground war kicked off? Okay.
No,
Yeah.
El Taji was our most south target we have.
Yeah. Okay. I figured. Cool. All right. Well, I told the folks that support the show financially that you guys were coming and they wanted to ask some questions. So if you don't mind, I'm going to do that. Joe Kunzler wants to know, tell us about your biggest raid in Desert Storm. We talked about night 2, but biggest, I don't know. I mean, actually, so I'll take Joe's question and tweak it a little bit. Was it ever that they would just send you in to do it, or were you always part of a larger or bigger raid?
Yeah, we were always part of a package.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, from what you've described today, you almost could have acted more like a F-117 because we did have an episode on that, and they were pretty much Lone Rangers, sounds like. But for what you were doing, was it important, I guess, to have the Eagles there to know your air picture was clean and all that? Or
I think we probably could have gone alone without any support whatsoever, because we were so low and so fast, and they didn't have any kind of integrated air defense system. Even without the weasels around, they just couldn't direct. They didn't have radars, search radars that could pick us up to direct the target tracker radars, which, they're like looking at the world through a soda straw. If you don't know where to look, you can't find anything. And our speeds were so high that they really didn't have, we were out of the envelope for everything except an SA-6. We could pretty much jam the SA-6. And they had most of their stuff down south.
Okay.
But we could have, but we had other things going on. We had B-52s.
Yeah.
They were doing a lot of work. And I think we had 8 or 10 of them a night. It was a lot.
Wow.
But put B-52s in the mix, and now you got to have all that other stuff.
Yeah. Well, but I guess that's the point. Maybe they need it, but you didn't. But it might have just been easier to give you a window of time. And then maybe at the end of that time, maybe some other force is striking. I mean, or, I don't know, maybe there were times when nobody was going in. But in other words, you had a vol, as we'd call it. Yeah. Okay. How many aircraft do you remember total would be in a package?
I think about 60.
Wow.
Yeah.
But that's counting tankers.
So we'd have 12
AWACS.
111s. So we had F-16s that were with the weasels. So we might have 8 F-16s, 4 F-4Gs, 3 or 4 tankers, AWACS, AC, EC-130s, and then probably 4 EF-111s.
Okay.
That's good.
I'm not any good at
And the
public.
buff. We were talking about that.
Yeah, and then the buff's going to. So, but just taking off that engine,
Okay.
I think it was around 60. I'm not going to do the public
That's a
math
lot.
to verify that.
All right. Tom, who doesn't want me to use his last name, says, noting the higher maintenance requirements of the Pig, how did you find the availability during Desert Storm? We already talked about you had to jump through hoops to get out on night 2.
Yeah, I had that one maintenance issue.
Okay.
I think we were probably better than 90%. We had 16 airplanes out there with the goal of launching 12 every night.
Mm-hmm.
I think there were a couple nights we were down to 10, and we had almost no maintenance turnbacks.
Wow. But that was, again, due to maintenance operations, not to combat loss or anything like that.
Yeah. The operation was lavishly supplied with parts and maintenance personnel.
Our maintenance did a great job. I mean, I never had an aircraft swap in my existence, but we would either, code 1, code 2, or code 3, depending on how bad the issue was when we came home. I was normally code 1. We'd have a couple code 2s, and next day it was always ready to go.
Is code 1 good to go? Code 2, fix something?
No
Code 3,
write-offs.
down?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. We had something similar in my squadrons. Just on that note, how old were the aircraft then? Do you remember? Were they relatively new or relatively old?
Old.
1968.
67, 68,
So
I
this
think.
is 20-ish years?
Yeah, mhm.
Okay. I think we answered Scott Morris's question. Did the F-111E perform different missions from the F-111F, or were they interchangeable? I think we for the most part covered that one. All right. Jim Gundog says, F-111 crews were the LGB kings of the day. What other platforms assisted you so you could be so effective? I think we just talked about some of the strike packages and tankers and all. Now, you didn't end up tanking on night 2, you said, at all? Or did you on the way out and I missed that?
We didn't start tanking until after we went further south towards Baghdad, and we didn't really need to. Unlike the lawn darts that really, they had to get a tank. Yeah, right, sorry. Because it was a 45-minute drag both ways.
Okay.
And to go anywhere south at all, they had to tank. But we started tanking when we were going down to Baghdad, and it's kind of, I don't know how the Navy did it, but the Air Force, when you did tanking, you got an anchor point, and you had to turn on, you had all these radio calls, and it was a pretty choreographed thing.
Yeah.
That's not how it went. Mm-hmm. We'd come up, and the tankers had 3 or 4 orbits about 100 miles north of the border. We would just, right-seaters looking for tankers, or things that could be tankers, and you're looking at tankers they actually had just had the formation lights on. So he would steer us to a tanker. We'd see the formation lights on the tanker. Look around. Oh, hey, there's a plane. We'll just kind of pull up behind him, or there's nobody.
Mm-hmm.
And just drive up to the boom, get your gas, disconnect, disappear, never say a word.
Sure. If you're that far north, I mean, you're pretty well safe, I would think, up there, right? Couldn't they have had all their lights on? Or you never know.
Actually, my mind's telling me it was just formation lights, but my brain's telling me what you just said, that they had lights on. Yeah. I think the first couple nights they didn't. Hence my experience with the tanker, but after about week 1 where we knew that their Air Force was completely non-functional, at that point they did have their lights on, right?
Well, by the time I got there in 1997 for OSW, tankers were over Iraq. We came in from Persian Gulf and we owned the South. So, how was the F-111, Anthony Lombardo wants to know, mission different from the start of the air campaign to the end? We talked about the altitude, but was the role of whether it was strategic or tactical targets more or less the same throughout?
The role did change. We started out, our mission for any conflict was primarily start out as suppression of enemy air defenses so that more vulnerable airplanes could operate. And so that's how we started, was the F-16s mostly operated during the day at that point, so they were more vulnerable than us, so we needed to knock down the EWGCI sites. So the first couple, 3 nights at least, maybe all of the low-level nights, were command and control and EWGCI targets.
Yeah. Bruce Thomas, who's one of your Air Force compadres, Beaker, he goes by, he wants to know, I believe F-111s trained to be, quote, all alone, low and very fast, into targets. What was the reality in the storm? Was it Libya Part 2? I think we've talked about you were alone but part of a package, right? Yes. And that is effectively what you did. But I don't know what he means here by was it Libya Part 2?
No, it was not.
Okay, what does he mean? Or what's he implying there? I'm not just talking about the distance you had to go, but...
The goal of Libya was deterrence. We wanted to reach out and touch Gaddafi.
Was it sort of a spanking too, though, a little bit?
Well, ideally, we were going to vaporize him. Okay, so he wasn't right in the exact spot to get vaporized, but we very nearly did so. And so the goal of Libya was, don't make us come back here and do it again, right? Like a kid's fighting in the back seat.
That's right. Don't make me pull this car over.
And it worked.
Okay.
So Desert Storm was entirely different. That was a war to obtain the political goal of Saddam removing his forces from Kuwait. Not at all similar. So you're just going to be doing this, keep doing what you're doing until we persevere.
John Clark wants to know, what was the call and response like, i.e. notification of the impending deployment, the relocations, and the ramp up to the first mission? Just to prove I was listening, I remember you saying you were already in Turkey for the weapons debt. Then you went home, someone else went, but then they sent you again. That's where you stayed. And I guess maybe the one thing I would add to John's question here is, right, the rest of the world, for those of us who are in the business, again, we don't necessarily bristle, but it's like, okay, if there's going to be something, I want to see how I'll do. When you got home, I don't know if either of you were in, families or otherwise, or maybe those who were, but what was that like for everybody else back home?
So I was dating my future wife at the time. She was on base. We met on base. This is after the first night of the war.
Okay.
And this is the next night. We were coming back from a movie theater. Vinny met us on the street. He's one of our Wizzos. And he goes, "Hey, Ram, I heard you took a round last night." My future wife, looked at me and she didn't even know that we were flying missions because they're on base.
Yikes.
She got deployed back to the States. She was a teacher. She got deployed with the dependents back in the States after the war officially kicked off for us. And so she was like, she didn't know, and I didn't tell her because we weren't supposed to tell anybody that we're actually flying these missions. So
she gave you the eyebrow.
She's like, "What? You got shot at?"
We were on base, and we didn't know if we were actually going to be taking part, because the Turkish government hadn't given approval. And it was like 3 days before the balloon went up. And suddenly there are KC-10s, DC-10 civilian freighters just lining up on final. And they were getting all the non-combatants out. And so they started evacuating the base 3 days prior. And that's when we knew we were going to go. Mm-hmm. I do remember that after my first mission, I was pretty shook up. I mean, I was scared frickin' witless. I'm not ashamed to admit it.
It was scarier for the pilots than the Wizzos because we were in the radar.
Your head's down, we're heads out.
And something weird happened between that end of that first mission, and I can't explain it except maybe it's a guy thing perhaps, but terrified after the first mission. The third mission, I was like, let's crank this excitement up some more.
Jeez.
And it got to be not sure I liked acknowledging that it'd be kind of a thrill thing, and the fear just completely went away. And they were still getting shot at a lot. But I remember one of the high altitude missions, I go, now we're getting pretty stupid. I go, turned off target a little bit steeper than normal. I said, "Hey, Clyde, look out there." And I went to afterburner, and guns started shooting at us.
You started to think you were invincible, huh?
Well, we were high enough that we probably were, but that was still stupid. Yeah, I can go on record. And then I think after I got back, I think it was probably a good 4 or 5 years before I could watch a 4th of July fireworks.
Really?
Without having a bit of a, adrenal reaction there. Nothing. I can't put it in the category of PTSD because people have that really bad. I'm not even going there with that, but still.
But something would happen. It would cause a reaction based on combat that you'd been in. Yeah, well, I mean, you could make a case for that. When did you get back to England?
March 9th. So 28th of February was our last mission. March 9th, we all flew back.
Wow. Yeah. When you got home, was it great, or was it like
It was incredible. I mean, we brought back the whole squadron to initial. We all parked, and it was all the families were out there on the flight line. The media was out there, and it was just incredible. I got an interesting story. I was just telling Gwin Bob on the way here. Aircraft 039, I don't know if you ever had a situation where important parts of your life were one tail number. Well, this airplane, 039, was not even our squadron. It was a 77th airplane. I was going through my logbook, and I didn't realize that 039 had several things happen in my life. The first was I earned my call sign in that airplane. I won't go into that story right now, but that's how I earned the call sign RIM, and and Doug became Sled.
Oh, come on, tell the story.
Okay.
No, we'll end with it.
Okay.
So,
Basically, it was the first aircraft I flew in the first mission of the war, the last mission of the war, and the airplane I ferried home.
Oh, wow.
And I actually did a dedication when they took that airplane and put it on a stand in Shaw Air Force Base. So I gave a dedication to it there. So that airplane is very special to me.
So it was just a sense of satisfaction when you were home.
Yeah.
We answered the call. We did our job. Now on to the next thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Back to training and peacetime missions. Yeah.
Okay. Next question. You're going to have to work with me on this one. It's from Nick Forster. Did your software help turn bullseye information into BRAA, B-R-A-A, to assist in your defensive reactions? If not, how did you derive this info? Now, as he has a little more here. As a fellow swing wing mud mover, parenthesis tornado, deriving this info was always challenging. I understand that an F-111 sustained CFIT, controlled flight into terrain, at night while threat reacting to an Iraqi MiG or Mirage early in the war. So the F-111's retired, so I don't know how much you do or don't want to disclose what systems it had. But again, the first question was, did your software help turn bullseye information into BRAA to assist in your defensive reaction?
What was that word you used after the word your? Was it software? Software?
He's thinking F-15.
We had no software.
We did establish that earlier. I could have answered this one, darn it.
We were the software.
Yeah.
So you had a system, though, that told you something, and it was up to your brains there to make sense out of it.
We had a RAW, which was basically an indicator, told us where the threat was coming from, electronic threat. We had the ALQ-131, so that's probably the most electronics we had in the airplane. And I mentioned earlier in our conversation, the 131 pod, it was a smart weapon, so it basically could jam whatever signal from whatever direction, and we didn't have to think about it. And the RAW basically gave us indications of that frequency coming in from whatever quadrant or direction that we actually had that coming in from. And we didn't react to it. It was more of like an FYI, so we knew we had an idea of where it was coming from.
I get the feeling that the business of being a military aviator or fighter pilot, whatever you want to call it, is changing in so much as you had to use systems to build your own situational awareness back in the day. And these days, I feel like it's provided to you and you have to just decide what to do with it. Sometimes on your visor, sometimes on the aircraft itself. And so I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I think based on the progression of technology, it's just how it was, right? He told you something, you had to make sense of it, do it, and
No, I know people don't believe this is possibly true, but there was no internet then. Seriously, there was no internet.
Yeah.
We had no software.
Yeah.
I had a handheld calculator that I programmed to do ballistics, an HP engineering calculator.
Wow.
That was the limit of our automation until that wonderful mission support system mini computer showed up. Mm-hmm. And that was it.
Yeah. That's
why I said that this is like telling your audience about the Peloponnesian Wars. Because the operation that we performed, if you compare it to the F-111F, completely different.
Yeah.
The F-111F was a step into the future, and we were the past that was rapidly receding.
Yeah. How much longer did you fly the F-111 after Desert Storm?
Well, for me personally, so this was like, we brought back March 9th. Mm-hmm. In April, I had my Finney flight and went on to be an instructor in nav school.
Okay. Yeah, you talked about that earlier. How many hours then did you end up with in the F-111?
Oh, about 600, 650, something like that.
Okay. All right. How about you?
I flew the airplane for another 6 months, just about 3,000 hours in it. And then went to Air Command and Golf College down in Montgomery, Georgia.
Yeah.
And followed that up with a 3-year tour at the Pentagon, about which we shall say no more.
You mentioned that before. Hold on, though, because you said you were a weapons school graduate, and I'm going to display my ignorance. At one point, it was a fighter weapons school, then it just became the weapons school.
Yeah.
What was it by then, and you went through in the F-111?
I went through in the F-111. We actually flew all our missions out of Mountain Home except for the final week.
Okay.
It was called Fighter Weapons School because at the beginning it was only fighters, and it was really built to fix shortcomings we found in Vietnam against our adversaries. So it started out as an air-to-air thing, and then gradually, included air-ground stuff. And then by the time, and then pretty soon I go, well, wait a minute, we got B-1s out here They need that expertise.
Right.
You got AWACS that we have to work with. And so that's why it became the weapons school.
Right.
It was because there was just so much more stuff than just fighters going out there.
I believe the intelligence officers can get a weapons school patch now. And I guess it just means being humble, credible, approachable, but also the expert in whatever field it is you are.
Humble?
You're supposed to be. Apparently that was after you.
No, it really did. It made a huge difference. We had perhaps one of the reasons our squadron got picked to go to Desert Storm was just luck of the draw. We had 4 FWIC grads, and the other squadrons only had 1 each.
Okay.
And that really did give us a level of technical expertise in weaponeering and mission packages and stuff like that, that having 4 guys there that could had a lot more training, that really made a difference.
Well, you had that experience, but also did each of you maybe have performed a red flag or something equivalent prior to Desert Storm?
I had 3 red flags in the F4, but not in the F-111.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had two red flags, I think, in the F-111.
Right, because the whole idea is not that the shooting in Desert Storm turned out to be like in Vietnam, but in Vietnam, as I understood it, folks were getting shot down on the first 10 missions because they just hadn't had those experiences. So did you find for you, night 2 or whatever, that those experiences, whether weapons school or red flag, had really helped you prepare for that night?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Because you had the whole team that you'd worked with before and the coordination, that had the fog of war, which is hard to practice, but you kind of do because something always changes, right?
And dealing with a package with different aircraft type, like we did in Desert Storm, where we had a composite package of, like Gwin Bob was saying, we had different fleet types doing, different aircraft types doing different things in part of your mission, and how it all integrated together. That was really reflected in Red Flag real well.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. I meant to ask you how many hours in the F-111?
Almost 3,000. Near's darn it.
Yeah.
Near's makes no difference.
Yeah. Fantastic. Awesome, guys. Well, gosh, this is a fun discussion. I guess we need to talk about call signs because we're getting close to that. But before we do, just so the F-111's been gone a while, as I understand it. Were the Aussies, I think, the last to fly it? Does that sound right?
Yeah, the F-111s, the F-111F retired in 97.
Okay.
The EF-111 in 2003, I think. And then the Aussies flew theirs through 2011.
But if I surprised you and said there was one out here on the ramp here at the Gillespie Field, we're at an FBO, Circle Air Group Studios here. What do you think? Go jump in it and go?
Sure, I would. I think I can remember how to start the motors.
You remember enough of it?
I'd love to. Yeah, I can do it.
Could you?
Yeah. Give me a checklist. So.
Yeah. Oh, of course. Aviators live and die by checklists. Awesome. All right. Well, so what's the future? I mean, future for the F-111 is it's going to hopefully get refreshed once in a while, but it's going to be on display at different museums, it sounds like, and in our hearts, and on video of doing the old dump and burn. We didn't even talk about that. I guess we have to. I'm sure you did that a handful of times. Really not that big a deal,
Not
right?
as far as you know.
Okay. Oh, was it not a lot?
It's not legal.
No, it wasn't.
I think I said this on the episode 111, but I was at the Meridian Air Show. I was a student in Meridian at the time, and an F-111 took off at the end of Sunday, and all of a sudden in my mind, it was on fire. I'm like, oh, I'm going to watch this ejection. I'm like, wait, what the heck? What just happened? I had no idea about the dump and burn at all. But all of a sudden, as this thing takes off and goes look like 45 degrees nose up, I just see this enormous fiery plume behind it, and I thought I was about to witness a mishap. But was it not allowed because they thought?
Well, I don't know that it was. I'm not sure I can remember a rule, strictly speaking, saying, but in my first tour on as lieutenant in England, we had an exercise with the Norwegian Air Force, and was there for a few days, and then we're heading out, and they intercepted us, and I think they're flying F-5s anyway, so we're cruising out at medium altitude to cross over the North Sea back to England, and this pair of F-5s join on us, and I'm leading, and I go, I have an idea. Flicked the dump switch, went to afterburner, and torch. And man, those F-5s, they move. Because they thought the same thing you did.
Yeah.
And my wingman said, Lead, you're on fire.
Watch this. No, I'm not.
And so we're like, I think there's 8 of us out there at this exercise, and ops officer was on the same frequency further down the road. And the only thing I could say was, no, I'm not.
I'll
and then
explain
they
later.
go, okay, I wonder how long this rug dance is going to last.
Yeah.
And yeah, I got called into the rug on
I'm
that
sure.
one, but it was.
But you weren't the one who like discovered you could do it. I'm
Oh
guessing.
no, it's because of the way the airplane's designed. There's
Right.
only one place, and you would have to dump fuel based on certain situations to get down to a landing weight, or only one place to put that. That's between the two engines. And there's only one thing that's going to happen if you go. And how long do you think till guys go? Yeah.
Well, I have to think one of the test pilots figured it out.
Oh
pretty
yeah, they
early.
knew, but it was like
Yeah.
I don't think anybody resisted the temptation.
Oh, yeah. No, they're going to find out. All right. So F-111 retired and on display, but what I'm trying to lead up to is what's the future all for you? Are you still involved in aviation or working, or you just enjoyed retired life, or what's going on these days?
I got forcibly removed from the flight deck.
We talked about it. Yeah.
I've been flying 767s for FedEx, and I really thought they were going to have to drag me off the flight deck. I was just going to be a sobbing wreck, covering myself in shame.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what, I couldn't tell you, but I shut off the last engine, walked off the flight deck, and it's like my brain said, that book is closed.
That's right.
You can put this on the shelf and pull it out when you want to revisit some memories, but that's done. And I really haven't thought about it since.
Well, it wasn't a surprise either.
No,
right?
it wasn't a
You knew
surprise.
leading up to it,
Yeah.
hey, it's coming. I think I'll be this way. But when the time came, you were handled it
Just
like
well and
cool,
truly retired now.
cool professional. That's great. And living somewhere up north, you had to drive all the way down?
Boise, Idaho. Living in the hills, just a few miles outside of town there, and love Idaho. It's a great place.
So I live here in California. I'm told if I move there, I need to change my license plate before I get there. Is that true?
Well, you probably won't get keyed.
Probably won't.
Gas is about $1.50 a gallon cheaper in Idaho
Yeah,
than it is
sorry about
here.
that. I'll have to give you a stipend for the trip down. How about you, Rim? What are you doing these days?
Well, like I said, I'm working at American Airlines doing the nav database. What
Still-
else can a navigator do? Work in navigation. Work with the FAA in designing some procedures, instrument procedures, visual procedures that we can put in the flight management system.
Okay.
And I love doing it. And it's just a great thing. And I've always dreamed. They did it with the B-52. They keep upgrading it with newer systems. This airplane's 80 years old now, and it's like, why couldn't they do that with the F-111? Why couldn't they make it stealth or, something, and do something with the avionics so that it'd be modern day? And have the even bigger dream of like, hey, let's bring the 60-year-old back into the cockpit, and see what he can do. But
John Glenn went back into space at 70-something or other.
right. So it's always back there. But no, like Gwin Bob, that chapter's over.
Yep.
And God has done an amazing thing in my life with where I'm at right now, and I love what I'm doing. And I still have these connections with the guys from the Squadron. We meet up every couple of years and talk about war stories and tell lies and have a great time.
Well, as you get older, it doesn't matter because you can't remember the
That's
lies or
true.
the facts anyway. So, and that's why the matching shirts, was that from a recent reunion?
It
or-
was the dedication of the F-111 memorial at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
wow.
That happened last
Very
year.
cool.
So
Good.
we coordinated.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
We did that much
If
preparation.
I'd asked, maybe I don't know if I have a white polo, but anyway, nobody's going to rip you out of that seat that you're in, that you're enjoying just because you're going to hit a certain birthday.
No, not at all. No, I can stay as long as I want. And I'm right now measuring the days, but I'll probably be doing it for a little bit.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
Call sign. Tell the story of your call
See,
sign.
now he's still
wants
getting
to
me
hear the
back for the
call
other story.
No, I didn't want to make sure we didn't
Rim.
leave
Now,
without.
first off, do you spell it with all caps? Because then maybe it's an acronym.
No, it's not. It's
Okay.
it's basically it was June of 1990. Doug and I, oddly enough, the guy I was crewed with, were on a mission to support the German Air Force. Our mission was to fly a low level in Germany, do an airfield attack on Buchel Air Base in Germany. While we did that, we had launched the tornadoes to intercept us, to try to take us down, and as part of their ORI. That's like a operational readiness inspection. So basically, we do the airfield attack. Everything is normal. They come after us. They intercept us. Everything's cool. And we're number 2 in a 2-ship. We come in and land. Number 1's landing. We're down normal approach. Doug and I are on short final. We touch down. Normally it takes about 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 feet to land that thing. We actually stopped the airplane in less than 1,000 feet. It just came to a stop. And I'm like, what the fuck just happened? I look over at Doug. I go, take a look out your side. Do you have anything going on over there? And he goes, I got a flat tire. And I'm going, I got 20 feet of flames. Eject. Get out of here. I didn't say eject, but I said, get out of the airplane. Egress. So we ended up shutting the airplane down, going to the front of the airplane, and we're looking back at our airplane totally engulfed in flames.
Oh, my gosh.
And fire trucks are already out there and everything. So what happened was a brake control valve got loose. Both tires locked up when we touched down, blew both tires, and we just skid down the runway. Sled did an excellent job of keeping the airplane on the runway, and that's how we got our call sign, Sled and Rim. As you probably guessed, the wheels were ground down to the rims, and that's how I got my call sign.
Well, and you should have gotten an honorary naval aviator hook or patch or something. That's pretty much what we do. And a little less than 1,000 even. But,
yeah, exactly.
Come to a halt pretty quick.
So we spent a week in at Bouchelle drinking beer and wine on the Rhine, and they fixed our airplane. And it was not a bad day.
No, not bad at all. But you did say the word eject. So let me ask, did you ever have to do that? Because the F-111 was different than all the others. We talked about that on episode 111.
No, thankfully, no.
No. How about you?
New guys who did.
Okay.
Yeah. Splash. Yeah.
No, we had
more call sign stories.
Yeah. The whole cockpit went.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That sounds, I don't know, weird to me. I never ejected anyway, thank goodness. But
well, the reason was we spent so much of our time in very thick air going very fast that with the ejection seat technology of the time, there was no way you're going to get out of the airplane and not
flail to death.
Be scattered all over the landscape.
Huh.
So the cockpit, the entire cockpit actually is some of the leading edge extensions that come up to fair end, that back about that far, and then about just in front of the windscreen. Whole thing went 35,000-pound thrust rocket, and then it had parachute. Comes and it was like it wasn't a 0-0 seat. I think it was 0 and 50 knots maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Airbags would come out for a feather light 35G touchdown.
Or if you land in water.
Yeah, or if you land in water. But everybody who jumped out ended up shorter. Seriously, they'd be about an inch shorter because it just hit the ground a freaking ton. Better than the alternative.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my closest buddy at Cannon when I was a lieutenant died in an ejection that went wrong.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
All right, well, on happier news, though, maybe, you're not Robert, you're Jeff. How did we come up with Gwin Bob?
That is probably the lamest call sign ever. You get call signs from really one or two. It's either a play on your name, Jello.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
So that's one way. The other way is you do something notorious and regrettable, typically.
Generally, yeah.
And I just blended into the background. I never really did anything notorious or regrettable, and my name is lame. You can't do anything.
Well, that was witnessed. Arguably,
yeah, well,
right? Unless you really were the second coming.
As far as anyone knows.
That's right, okay.
And I think when I was a Cannon, somebody just gave up and just started calling me Gwin Bob. And it's like, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. And I got to Hayford, totally different group of people. And somebody else, okay, Gwin Bob it is.
You couldn't just show up and pretend you're like, those guys wanted to call me and then come up with some cool name.
No.
Yeah, okay. You probably never met another Gwin Bob.
No,
I haven't met another Jello. I've met a Jelly.
Yeah.
And for a while, when I used to put a lot of foof in my hair, they would spell it with a G instead of a J. So that was fun. Anyway.
You got the patch, right? It says Jello.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any here or not, but I have a whole bunch at home. Anyway, good stuff, guys. Well, I'm glad you persisted at me. I know I was a little bit hard to reach there for a while. Apologies for that. But what did I not ask you about your experiences in Desert Storm flying the F-111?
I think you covered the territory.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right, guys. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, great time. Glad you could come down here. Thanks a lot.
Hey, thanks for watching this episode of the Fighter Pilot Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. I sure do every time. Now, in case we had some jargon there you didn't understand, go on over to fighterpilotpodcast.com where we have a glossary as well as musings, which are just our blogs, and some cool merchandise that you can check out as well. So we'll see you next time here on the Fighter Pilot Podcast. So long.